Darts has a long and surprisingly strategic history, with origins far older than most people realise. It evolved from military training, social competition, and a bit of clever improvisation. The concept of throwing sharp objects at a target dates back thousands of years. Ancient Greeks trained for battle by throwing spears at circular targets, sharpening both their accuracy and competitive instincts. Similarly, the Romans practiced javelin throwing in military drills, refining their ability to hit specific points from a distance. But the closest early relative of darts can be traced to medieval England. In the Middle Ages, archery was more than a skill, it was mandatory. English kings, especially Edward III and Henry VIII, enforced laws requiring all able-bodied men to practice archery regularly. This wasn't a casual hobby, it was a national defense strategy. The transition from warfare to leisure happened when archers, looking for ways to refine their skills, started practicing with shortened arrows or crossbow bolts. Instead of standing in an open field, they brought the game indoors, using wine barrel lids, tree stumps, or wooden planks as targets. These natural wooden surfaces had rings from aging or wood grain, creating a natural scoring system, one of the earliest forms of the dartboard. By the late 1300s, the game had caught on among soldiers and aristocrats alike. Nobles turned it into a pastime, playing for entertainment in their homes, while commoners played it in taverns. It was seen as both a skill-sharpening exercise and a social game. One of the earliest known figures connected to darts was King Henry VIII, who was reportedly a huge fan. According to historical records, he received a beautifully crafted set of darts as a gift from Anne Boleyn in the 1500s. These were made with wooden bodies, metal tips, and feather flights, resembling miniature arrows. For centuries, there were no standardized boards or scoring rules. Every region and pub had its own setup. Some early dartboards were simply cross-sections of tree trunks, with the natural rings serving as scoring zones. Others used clay or chalkboards, where players would mark their own scores. The first recorded effort to standardize the dartboard came in the 1800s, when pub owners started creating designated areas for play. But it was Brian Gamlin, a Lancashire carpenter in 1896, who changed everything. His radical numbering system, designed to punish inaccuracy, turned darts into a real test of skill. By the early 1900s, darts had transformed from a casual pub pastime into an organized sport, with the first official tournaments appearing across England. 1927, the news of the World Championship, the first truly national darts tournament. Until this point, darts had been regional, with scattered competitions and no clear way to determine who was the best. This event changed that. It was structured, organised, and most importantly, it was big enough to draw attention beyond the pubs. The winner, Jim Pike, walked away with £6, roughly $380 in today's money. Not life-changing, but significant enough to turn local pub champions into national contenders. This tournament exposed a new reality. Darts was growing, and players weren't just throwing for pride anymore. They were throwing for something bigger, legitimacy. And where money and prestige start to rise, so does the need for structure. Enter the National Darts Association, formed in 1925. This was the first real attempt to regulate darts. Standardized rules, official boards, and the beginning of what would eventually lead to professional competition. Without this foundation, darts would have remained a pub game. Instead, it became something greater, a sport with history, and most importantly, a future. By the 1930s, nearly every pub in Britain had a dartboard, and the game was exploding in popularity. What started as a pastime for soldiers had become a national obsession, but one problem remained. Darts still wasn't taken seriously. It was entertainment, a game for drinkers, not athletes. That perception would take decades to change, but the pieces were already falling into place. Then came the biggest catalyst yet, television.
Bird is the most famous darts player in the world, Jim Pike, and here are some of his secrets.
October 13th, 1984, the impossible became reality. John Lowe stood at the oche, locked in a match at the MFY World Match Play. What happened next was something no one had ever seen before. This was different. This was televised. 9 darts, the first perfect leg ever caught on television.
Way back on 282.
60.
For those who had followed darts for years, it was proof of something they had always suspected, that the game had entered a new era, that with television, higher stakes, and relentless competition, the standard was rising. At the time, few understood just how rare this moment was. The next televised nine-darter wouldn't come for another 14 years when Sean Greatbatch finally repeated the feat in 2002. Lowe's moment proved something. Darts could produce the kind of perfection that other sports could only dream of. And now that the world had seen it, the expectation was set. A perfect leg wasn't just a fantasy anymore, it was possible, and from that moment on, players would chase it relentlessly. Darts was growing, the pubs had embraced it, national tournaments were proving there was an audience, and the best players were no longer just local heroes. They were becoming names people recognized, but it still wasn't a sport, not in the way football, boxing, or even snooker were. 1972, ITV's World of Sport puts darts on national television. It was a simple formula: put a camera in front of a dartboard, let the players do the rest. And it worked. There was something hypnotic about it. The tension of the throw, the explosion of the crowd when a treble 20 hit, the way a single dart could shift everything in an instant. It was precision under pressure, and it made for great television. But the real breakthrough came in 1978. The BBC broadcasted the first World Professional Darts Championship, and suddenly, darts wasn't just a game anymore. Pub geezers now found themselves in front of millions. Names like Eric Bristow, John Lowe, and Jockey Wilson weren't just playing for prize money, they were becoming icons. Bristow, in particular, understood the moment better than anyone. He performed and the audience ate it up. Television changed everything. Prize money skyrocketed, sponsorship deals followed. Darts players were professional athletes competing in front of millions, playing for sums of money that would have been unthinkable just a decade earlier. But there was a problem. With success came division. Not everyone agreed on where the sport was headed, and before long, darts was headed for its biggest conflict yet. A split that would change the game forever. With success comes expectation. Players wanted bigger paydays, more exposure, and the respect that other televised sports enjoyed. Instead, they got stagnation. By the early 1990s, the cracks in the system were obvious. The British Darts Organisation, which had controlled professional darts since the 70s, was struggling to keep up. Television coverage was declining, sponsorship money was drying up, and the players, the ones actually carrying the sport, were the ones paying the price. A group of top professionals, including Phil Taylor, Eric Bristow, and Dennis Priestley, had seen enough. They weren't just unhappy with the money, they were unhappy with the lack of ambition. Other sports were evolving, darts was being left behind, and they weren't going to sit around and wait for things to change. In 1992, they made their move. 16 of the best players broke away from the BDO and formed their own organisation, the World Darts Council, later renamed the Professional Darts Corporation. Their goal was simple: build a version of darts that was bigger, better, and more lucrative than anything the BDO could offer. The split was a full-blown war. The BDO banned the breakaway players from its events, court cases followed, venues had to choose sides, even commentators were forced to pick between the two organisations. It was darts civil war, and for a while it looked like both sides might lose. The BDO had history on its side. It had the prestige, the tradition, and control over the Lakeside World Championship, which was still the most recognised title in darts. The PDC had the best players, but without tournaments, without TV deals, and without credibility, that meant nothing. Then came the turning point. The PDC struck a deal with Sky Sports. The BDO had BBC, but Sky had something more valuable: ambition. They saw what darts could become. A sport built for entertainment, with walk-on music, packed arenas, and players who were more than just competitors. They were personalities. The results were immediate. Prize money in the PDC dwarfed what the BDO could offer. New stars emerged, crowds got louder, and slowly, the balance of power shifted. By the early 2000s, the PDC wasn't just an alternative, it was the future of darts. The BDO. It never recovered. It limped on for years, but the writing was on the wall. In 2020, after decades of trying to stay relevant, the BDO collapsed. The organisation that once ruled darts was gone. The PDC had won. The split was messy, bitter, and at times personal. But it did something crucial. It forced darts to evolve. It turned a game played in quiet pubs into a spectacle. Now let's talk the bread and butter of the sport. The dartboard and the dart itself, two deceptively simple tools, which have undergone a quiet revolution. And in a sport where millimeters decide matches, these changes haven't just influenced performance, they've reshaped the entire game. Let's start with the darts. After the early adaptations from crossbow bolts came brass around the 1920s. It was a game changer, literally. Brass allowed for more consistent shapes and weights, But brass has a problem. It's bulky. You want tighter groupings on the board. You need slimmer barrels.
The introduction of the brass dart occurred in about 1925-26. Again, wooden body, turkey feathers, but this time a metal brass body.
Enter tungsten. By the late 1970s, tungsten had become the weapon of choice. Denser than brass, it allowed for thinner darts with the same weight, meaning tighter groupings and fewer bounce outs.
Being replaced by tungsten, which was a much more dense material, therefore the darts that were manufactured, like these ones here, could be much more narrow, and that improved the chances of obtaining that fairly elusive 180.
That wasn't just an upgrade, it shifted how players approached their throws. You could now afford to be aggressive with your targeting. The risk of ricochet dropped, the scoring potential went up. And players noticed, they started customizing, grip patterns, tapered barrels, personalized weights down to the gram. Because at the elite level, equipment isn't just preference, it's identity. A dart that feels wrong by a fraction can throw off rhythm, release, and confidence. It's not superstition, it's precision engineering meeting mental warfare. Then there's the board. Early dartboards were made of elm, soaked in water to prevent cracking. Great for pub furniture, terrible for consistency. The boards dried out, splintered, and absorbed moisture unevenly. You didn't play the board, you played its mood. Everything changed in 1934 with the introduction of bristle boards made from compressed sisal fibers, the same material used in rope. They self-healed, held shape, and allowed for a uniform playing surface.
The most modern boards, of course, are made from bristle. That was first introduced in 1934 and was a material called sisal, which is used in the making of ropes. But in the case of a dartboard, biscuits of sisal are compacted together to make the modern dart.
For the first time, the board was reliable. Players could trust it. The game became less about compensating and more about executing. Then came the treble ring. Before it, the bullseye was the only real high-risk, high-reward zone. The treble 20 changed everything. Now, you didn't need a flashy center shot, you needed consistency at the top of the board. And with that shift, scoring strategy evolved. The most dangerous players weren't showmen, they were machines.
The treble was introduced, the modern dartboard, and it effectively moved the highest scoring area, which was normally the bullseye, higher up the board to what is now the treble 20.
In the amateur world, electronic dartboards changed the landscape again. Auto-scoring, online play, stat tracking. It made the game more accessible, but also more competitive. Casual players could now benchmark themselves against global opponents. It wasn't just about pub bragging rights anymore. It was about climbing leaderboards. And then came the tech revolution on the broadcast side. High-speed cameras tracking dart flight, live score overlays, real-time averages, checkout percentages, heat maps. It's not just spectacle, it's education. Viewers now see the game the way pros do. They understand pressure points, miscalculations, strategy. The commentary has evolved with it, less about explaining the basics, more about dissecting decisions in real time. In short, the tools changed, but so did the way we experienced them. But not every innovation stuck. Just when the treble had established itself as the ultimate scoring weapon, someone tried to take it even further. Enter the quadro board, a dartboard with a fourth scoring ring. Where a treble gave you triple points, the quadro offered quadruple. Hit the quadro 20 and you'd get 80 points with a single dart. Land 3 of those, you're staring at a 240. The idea was to inject more drama, higher stakes, and yes, more 9-darters. On paper, it looked like the next logical step. It wasn't. The quadro board made its debut in the early 90s, most notably used in the news of the World Championship revival and a few exhibition events. But it didn't last long. Purists rejected it. Players found it gimmicky. And strategically, it distorted the rhythm of the game. The treble 20 had become a core part of scoring psychology. It forced players to find a balance between aggression and control. The quadro blew that up. Suddenly, the optimal strategy wasn't just high scoring, it was reckless. Matches felt warped. The traditional flow of 501 building, chipping away, calculating the checkout, was lost in a blur of inflated numbers. Even Phil Taylor, who played on it, didn't campaign for its return, because the quadro didn't reward mastery, it rewarded volume. You could miss your rhythm, miss your doubles, and still outscore your opponent with a single hot visit. It was darts on steroids, but without the finesse. Eventually, the quadro faded. Promoters dropped it. broadcasters ignored it, and players stopped acknowledging it as serious competition. The board still exists, often dusted off for nostalgia or fun, but as a serious tool of the sport, it never stood a chance. Darts didn't need more scoring. It needed more meaning in the scoring it already had, and the treble ring, as it turns out, had been perfect all along. Eventually, darts found its way overseas and out of the UK. The real catalyst, Raymond van Barneveld. When Barney won his first BDO World Championship in 1998, the Netherlands erupted. He wasn't just a world champion, he was a national icon. Darts went mainstream in a country that until then had barely cared. Dutch fans became some of the most passionate in the sport. Pubs, arenas, entire cities adopted darts like it had always belonged to them. And when Barney jumped to the PDC and beat Phil Taylor in that 2007 Classic, he validated every European player dreaming of doing the same. Then came Michael van Gerwen, and the Dutch takeover was real, but it didn't stop there. Germany embraced darts with the kind of fan culture usually reserved for football. Massive venues sold out for Premier League nights. Players like Max Hopp gave the home fans someone to believe in, even if the trophy stayed out of reach. Australia had its moment with Simon Whitlock and Damon Heta, players who proved that the time zone difference didn't mean a damn thing if you had a good throw and a better mentality. The USA kept flirting with darts, never quite committing but producing flashes of brilliance. Larry Butler, Danny Baggish, and a few wildcard upsets that reminded everyone they're always one hot streak away from relevance. And then there's Asia. A region once written off is now rapidly emerging. Seigo Asada, Paul Lim, Haruki Muramatsu, names that started as qualifiers, now seen as threats. What makes darts different is how quickly greatness can come from anywhere. You don't need a training facility, you need a board, some tungsten, and the mindset to withstand pressure in front of 10,000 screaming fans. And it's not just geography that changed the game, it's who's stepping up to the oche. For decades, darts was a boys' club, not officially, but culturally. It was loud, aggressive, and soaked in years of pub-based tradition. Women had to be exceptional to even be taken seriously. Enter Maureen Flowers. Back in the 1970s, Flowers wasn't just beating women, she was beating men regularly. She was sharp, composed, and had the throw to back it all up. She wasn't just a player, she was a statement. The first woman to compete at a high level against men, and the first to show the world that gender had nothing to do with talent on the dartboard. But the momentum didn't stick. The women's game spent decades fighting for scraps, limited TV time, lower prize money, and less exposure. Not because the talent wasn't there, but because the narrative was ignored. That changed in 2020. Fallon Sherrock, Alexandra Palace. First round of the World Championship. She beats Ted Evitz. The crowd goes ballistic. Second round, she takes out Mensa Suljovic, a top 10 seed. Now the world is watching. Sherrock didn't just win, she out-threw, out-focused, and outplayed. And suddenly, the conversation wasn't about whether women could compete. It was about why they hadn't been given more chances to prove it. Since then, Fallon has become the face of the women's revolution. But she's not alone. Lisa Ashton, a four-time women's world champion, won her PDC tour card on merit through Q School, no shortcuts. Mikuru Suzuki, soft-spoken but lethal, brought an entire generation of Japanese fans into the sport. Bo Greaves, barely into her 20s, is posting match averages that would hold up against most of the men's field. And the psychology here is key. These women aren't just trying to prove they belong, they're doing it with every throw. Their presence has raised the bar, not just for women, but for everyone. They've forced the sport to evolve again. Darts is no longer male-dominated because of ability. It's male-dominated because of tradition, and tradition is losing its grip. Darts didn't evolve by accident. What started as a game of wine barrels and wooden shafts is now a global sport with packed arenas, multi-million-pound tournaments, and players treated like rock stars. But progress doesn't come clean. For every milestone in darts history, there's been manipulation lurking in the shadows. Click here to watch the video on the biggest cheaters in darts history, and how some of them almost got away with it.